and then press the transition button, and it should switch the screens. You did it.
Look at that.
Good evening.
She trained the trainer. Trainers being trained, or training as a trainer. She is the trainer.
I trained the
work.
trainer. Well.
Isn't that what they? You ever been to a train the trainer training? It's funny how they say that.
No. Speaking of, did you get all your homework done?
I did. It was
Ooh,
due
baby.
this morning, so I hope I did.
He thought it was due next week on the 11th.
When we go to class. And
it was
then
due today.
yesterday, I had the opportunity to start working on it.
He said.
And I was like,
I
I should
think-
probably get to work on
No,
this.
he said, I think I'm going to come over to Bartlesville and watch volleyball with you. I need to do my homework. I said, I think you should just do your homework. I'm just sitting here. It's boring.
Yeah.
Just do your homework. So he logs in 3 hours later. You need the transition, black screen. 3 hours later. He calls me and says, I'm on question 8 of 12. And I was like,
8 of 14.
Oh, well, whatever it was. And it's due tomorrow.
Yep.
I'm glad I opened my email. And I said, yeah,
So
no kidding.
a
Because
little over 4 hours
when he
in front
goes
of a
to
computer
training
yesterday.
next week,
Yeah.
he won't get a certificate. They won't print it if the
They will now,
paperwork's not in.
because I got my work done on time.
Barely, but
Yeah.
on time nonetheless.
Day before time. So
Still on time.
it is. Welcome back. How you been?
Thank you. How's your mom then?
My mom is over there.
It's a
hobbling
phrase.
around.
I didn't need you to answer.
I know it
Just-
is.
Just let me say it.
It's hilarious.
And move on.
I love it. You doing good?
Yeah, I'm very tired. Today has been a day.
You did great today.
Thanks.
I'm proud of you.
You weren't even in there.
I know, but I'm still proud of you.
I'm sure it was awesome.
Yeah. So we have been, thanks for joining us, by the way. If you're following along, we're going to be looking at the book of Luke, and we're going to be talking about this overview. Did you ever get taught about like the origins and the writers of the Gospels?
No. I mean,
Okay.
maybe, but not that I'm just recalling fresh.
So in your upbringing, did they ever talk about which one was like the earliest gospel written? I love this because she hasn't been here the last 2 weeks, and we have covered a lot of it.
It's all new to me.
I'm going to throw out I'm going to throw out some popular opinions, and then I'm going to argue with some of them. Most popular opinion is that the Gospel of Mark was written first, and that it is the most concise and shortest gospel. Do you know who the audience intention? We talked about this last week. The intended
then no, I
audience
don't know.
of the book of Mark. Why would Mark not include a genealogy?
Oh, probably because it was a not Hebrew audience.
Yeah, not Hebrew audience. That's good. Yes. Romans in particular.
Okay.
Very, very quick and uses the word immediately a lot.
You did say that on Sunday. I did catch that.
Uses the word immediately a lot because it's fast-paced, trying to keep the attention of not Hebrew audience, a Roman audience. If you missed last week, did we record last week? Man, you missed a good one.
Why didn't you record it?
I don't remember. Yeah. It was...
Oh.
Okay. All right. Someone just threw out the word rebellion. So there is an altar close by for whoever needs to meet there. We did not record it, and it was really good. I'm very partial
Clearly.
to our Wednesday night, what we do.
He always says.
But the
was
Mark
really good.
conversation
Like
last
you're
week,
leading it. You can't just claim it was really good. Really good time.
The-
Really fun time.
my co-leader was phenomenal.
Did you sit up here in the hot
He
seat?
did twice,
Nice.
2 weeks in a row.
Why are you not
Got a
just
guest
continuing the
co-host.
Gospels up here then?
Um,
Yeah.
the
I
gospel,
am better to look at than
the
two of you.
Gospel of Mark is phenomenal to walk through because, I'm not going to get lost in it.
Nope,
It was
don't do
really,
it.
really good. If you missed it last week, I'm sorry. Maybe at some point we'll record it again, and I don't know if it'll be as good the second time, but it might be. We might get better at it. The week before, we talked about the book of Matthew. Matthew goes through a lot of detail in the genealogy because
I'm sure it's to a Hebrew audience, they care.
It's written to a Hebrew audience, but a specific Hebrew audience. We use the term mumser.
Mumser?
Which, if you look it up, it's actually mamzer. Anyway, but
what does that mean?
It means outcast, separated one. And it was really important. That genealogy is really important in that conversation because in that conversation, there's so what do we say? It's the worst. If you're doing a Hebrew genealogy, it's about the worst genealogy you can do. It is not contextual, and you include a lot of women that are unnecessary to include and there are terms and like just the people that are involved are a lot of them. It's like, well, you don't need to put that there, but it is where some of the really, really good stuff is. So, popular opinion says that Mark came first and that Matthew shared a lot of the information and material. We'll call it Q material because that's what the scholars use it and call it. This is all the shared material. And most people would say that Mark came first and Matthew came next and expounded on it, and then Luke came after and he gave order to it all. And he put it chronologically and made it make sense. And many scholars will say that Luke came along and harmonized the synoptic gospels. That's a word that we have been very quick to say we are not going to do. We are not going to harmonize these gospels because we believe that they are intentional accounts for specific audiences and not meant to give an exact account. The reason, one of the ones we used this last week and we talked about it, when was Jesus offered wine? Through his crucifixion process, when was he offered wine? What do you mean?
I don't know. When they dipped the rag in the thing?
Then when they put a hyssop, put the
It was on the cross.
So when they put a sponge in
Is that what
the
you're
wine
about?
and vinegar and stuck it with the hyssop branch.
Okay, I thought you meant like just regular wine. And
yeah, that would be, yeah.
Okay, well, I remembered the vinegar part.
Well, the Gospel of Mark says that he's offered wine mixed with myrrh before that.
When?
I guess you should read the Gospel of Mark. We read it last week. Huh? Yeah, and he said no. And there's a reason for that. Again, it was really, really good. I'm telling you. Really, really good what we did last week. Yeah.
Was it that good?
Okay. It was really good. So anyway, we're not going to try to harmonize the gospel because the Gospel of Mark is the only one that says that Jesus was offered wine mixed with myrrh, which is the most expensive wine on the face of the earth.
On the face of the planet?
On the planet.
Why?
At the time.
Why is this so expensive?
Well, because they were offered kings. It was part of a.
Is myrrh a spice?
Yes. So who do you think might have been in charge of that?
Herod.
Yeah.
I've been listening.
Yes. So.
Also, we talked about it on Sunday night with you.
So most people say that Luke comes along to tell a more chronological, detailed, orderly gospel. And, Bill, what does your study Bible, my study Bible does too, say that about Luke? Says that he is a what? A Gentile. Yes. Most people would say that Luke is a Gentile and that he wrote to the Gentiles because he was a Gentile. And so this is the most popular opinion about who Luke is.
So what's your argument?
Yeah, how long was he a Gentile? This is a great question. So a few problems that we have. Luke was a doctor, and we're going to get to that. We're almost there. Luke gives an account of the gospel. Matter of fact, he writes the book of Acts. And he writes it from a first-hand perspective because he's following the disciples and the apostles. And he is interacting with them well before the first Jerusalem Council. Why is the first Jerusalem Council important? What did they discuss at the first Jerusalem Council? Anybody? What are we going to do with the Gentiles? That was the conversation. Remember in the book of Acts, Paul says that he confronts Peter directly to his face about how he's acting at Antioch. Yeah. And then they end up back at Jerusalem and they're having this conversation. This is the record of the first council, the Jerusalem Council, which is actually being documented firsthand in experience in the meeting room by
Luke. He just looked in here.
So, if it's being documented by Luke, you realize that there were followers of, who was it? It was Timothy. One of the most famous happenings is Timothy is not a Jew. He is a Gentile. He is uncircumcised. He's traveling with Paul at the time. And when Paul comes back into the meeting, they leave Timothy outside. Timothy has to wait for the results of the meeting, while Luke is allowed to be in the meeting. So why would they have problem with Timothy as a Gentile but not Luke as a Gentile?
Because he wasn't a Gentile?
Because one option is that Luke was a proselyte.
What does that mean?
Which means he was a Gentile who converted to Judaism and took on the whole law and took on circumcision and took on eating kosher.
For, like, how long before that moment?
So but it doesn't matter. Because
could have been the day before.
In the Jewish culture, if you're a proselyte and you take on circumcision and the whole law, you are Jewish. Even today. So he would not have been viewed as a Gentile to these Jewish people. So that's why he's allowed in the room. Okay. Because they would have recognized him as Jewish. That's why Timothy's left outside the room.
Because he wasn't.
Because he's not Jewish. And then once the first Jerusalem Council is completed, and they make this decision and this determination that while it's Peter's ministry to reach the Jews, it's Paul's to reach the Gentiles, now the two can come together in the same house to hear the same gospel and be together as one body. And Luke is involved in all of that. So how can we look back and go, well, he's a Gentile, when they didn't treat him as a Gentile in the first century? And Luke was a physician, yes?
That's what I've been told.
So if Luke is a physician, that must mean in the Greek world, he would operate at the Asclepion.
That's a big word.
For
say that.
Asclepion. They would have in the Greek or Roman world, he would have been recognized as an Asclepian priest.
Not a doctor?
That is what a doctor is.
Oh.
What is the Asclepion?
I don't know.
What should we think when we hear the term Asclepion?
Huh? Oh, hospital? Why would I think that?
Because Asclepion is one of the 4 pillars of Hellenism.
I have never heard you say that
word. Asclepion is the hospital.
I've never heard you say that word.
It's the healthcare center.
I've never heard you say that word.
I'm sorry.
You haven't heard it either, have you? See? Okay.
The
Because you
Asclepians.
said the gymnasium. Well, that's the theater, not the actual gymnasium.
The gymnasium is the schoolhouse.
Oh, that's a schoolhouse. Well, whatever. All
we
these
would think
random words.
education. Asclepian is the hospital.
I would never think that.
So they would have recognized him as an Asclepian priest. So he'd be very educated. And so potentially in a family that has converted to Judaism, so he's recognized as Jewish and operates as an Asclepian priest or an Asclepian leader or a physician, then where might he fit into the Jewish world? What group of the Jews might he fit into? The 5 that we talked about. Well, he's obviously not a Pharisee.
No.
And he's obviously not an Essene.
No.
And he's obviously not a Zealot.
Would he be a Sadducee?
He's obviously not a Sadducee because he's not a priest.
Oh, well, darn. What's another one? A Herodian. Well, that makes the most sense because he's a doctor.
So the last one would be potentially in the Jewish culture being part of the Herodian group. Well off, comes from a well off family.
So was
well educated, most likely. So most people would say, when we said in the past, this is a Jewish book written to Jewish people. And most people would go, yeah, okay. And some would go, but there's one Gentile author in there, and that's Luke. And the argument would be a couple of points that we've just brought up. This is who he is. The second thing that they reference is in the first chapter of Luke. Do you want to read verses 1 through 4 for me?
Yeah. I wish you would have told me that earlier.
He makes this reference that some people will say is a specific person, but it is a Greek. It is definitely Greek in its nature. So, verse 1 through 4. Tell me who we're talking to when you get there. Chapter 1 of the book of Luke.
Inasmuch as many have taken in hand to set in order a narrative of those things which have been fulfilled among us. Wow. Just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered them to us. It seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write to you an orderly account, most excellent Theophilus. Theophilus. There we go.
Yeah.
That you may know the certainty of those things in which you are instructed.
So, this term Theophilus is a Greek term. What might it mean, Chelsea?
Friend of God.
Friend of God. Very good. It does.
Board.
It means...
You know what I've learned since August?
Read the board.
Well, no, not since August. Really, since I've been utilizing my whiteboard in my classroom so much.
Really handy.
I say to my kids all the time, it's on the board.
Yeah.
On the board. I said that like 6 times today.
So. Theophilus.
Oh.
Is it a real guy?
I have no idea.
Is it a reference to other people?
It could have Herodian roots. It could refer to the church.
He could have Herodian roots, but friend of God would be this reference to people who are followers, and they point at this and they go, well, that's a Greek term. That's clearly a Greek term. It's clearly a Gentile term. We're talking about people who are. They might have used this term for people who are Gentiles that are closely connected to the Jews or friendly to them. But friend of God would be very specific to like someone who's actually close to God and not just the people of God. And so it gives us another indication that he's potentially Herodian. So he is close to, and this would be a familiar term that maybe they would use in the Greek to refer to.
The Theophilus term?
Yes, that they would refer to themselves. Hey, you're a friend of God. You may be part of this Greek culture, but you are a friend of God. Because really, for the Herodians, that's the only thing that set them apart from just Roman citizens, right? They had all the luxury of it, but the difference was, hey, while you guys are at mud wrestling on Sunday, we're at least or on Saturday, we're at least at Shabbat services. We're still friends of God. So, potential thing there. And so that could just refer to the church as well. And it could be a writing, realistically. There could be a person named Theophilus, that he wrote this account to, meant to be shared. So there's a lot of opinions about that. And so if Luke was coming along to write this chronological, dependable gospel, if we start to look at the Gospel of Luke and really scrutinize it, he doesn't do he's not very chronologically responsible. He has stories in different orders than
but
the
he didn't
other
say
Gospels.
That he was going to give you a chronological. He said orderly.
So,
because I can bring order to things, but that doesn't mean I'm going to put it in chronological
okay, so
did I skip ahead?
Let's start. Yeah, but let's just hit it.
Okay.
I would say that his gospel is not very orderly. Let's read that again, and we are going to implement this idea, and we're going to talk through. When we get done, we're going to read a couple of things that are going to line up. But what we're going to go into is a Harvard book study that you can get for the low price of, let me tell you,
so much money,
$699.
Something ridiculous.
A scholarly book written in 1978 that is out of print now. There's 3 of them available on Amazon. One for $6.99, one for $5.99, and one for $4.49. $449, not $4.49. A book that has 336 pages, written by M.D. Goulder. And the title of it is The Evangelist Calendar. Now, he has this wide-ranging opinion and theory on what goes on. Don't necessarily agree with all of it. I have an access to it where I can look at it that's holes. The W should be gone, I guess. I get access to it for like an hour at a time online. So I read what I can, process it, take some screenshots of a couple pages, because there's different charts and stuff. And he goes further and further, and I think he kind of falls in love with his own theory. But his theory and his application on the book of Luke is definitely worth considering. I'll say it that way. I think it's very, very good, and I think we should consider it. So, what should we do now? Let's read back through, probably in a different version than what you have, verses 1 through 4. Either the NIV or ESV is fine. That's perfect. All right, we're going to read back through, and I'll pause you when we're there, when we can kind of stop and talk through.
Many? Oh, okay.
We're going to get to verse 2. Let's get through verse 2.
Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word.
Okay, that's verse 1 and 2, right? Yeah.
Are we following along?
So I am. Mine has a little bit different. I'm the ESV. It has a little different. So what was the end of that verse? Ministers of the word?
Yes, servants of the word.
Servants of the word. Okay. The idea that Luke is a Gentile writer writing to the Gentiles, I think, personally, and you can wrestle with this however you like, I think is completely wrong. One, because we've talked about some of the reasons so far of why I would not associate Luke as a Gentile. Now I'm going to argue that Luke is not here filling holes for the Gentiles. Rather, specifically right here, these servants of the word. Is that what it says? Servants of the word. That term, servant of the word, is a direct quote, is a direct title from the Septuagint, which that term references the Hasanim.
I feel like you're just making stuff up at this point.
Who are the Hasanim?
He agrees with me.
Where do the Hasanim serve?
Hasidic
Jews have what?
House.
No, in the house, yeah. The Hasidic Jews, where are they? Who are the Hasidic Jews? There's two groups of the Jews that we've talked about that are Hasidic. You're hilarious. Are you looking at me? Why are you looking at me like that?
I was waiting on you to say the answer because I don't know.
You do know. They built their life around one thing. Around the law. Around the word. Not the Sadducees. Not the Essenes. Neither of those groups would be considered part of the Hasidim. The Zealots and the Pharisees. They separated themselves from being connected to, but they didn't leave the temple altogether. They went back to the temple. But instead of going to the temple every Sabbath, where did they go? They went to the synagogue.
Oh, yeah.
So they built their whole lifestyle, their whole life around the synagogue. The Hasanim were the servants of the word. At each of these synagogues, did they have a whole collection that was all of the Old Testament? All of the scrolls of the Old Testament? No, they had partials, maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah.
So the Hasanim, they were responsible for memorizing and knowing all the rest of the scripture that wasn't there.
Wow, that'd be a lot.
The Hasanim are the servants of the word. So now, if we know that Luke is involved in all these things, potentially recognized actually as a Jew, and if he is a Jew, and he's writing this orderly account, he says, inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses, and it says, and the Hasanim have delivered them to us. Does it make sense that he would be writing to Gentiles?
Probably not.
So he's referencing here in the first 4 verses that most people go, well, clearly he's talking to the Gentiles. But I don't think it's as clear as we make it out to be. Because he makes this specific reference to the Hasanim and calls people friends of God, is who he's writing to. And if we take this reference of who he is as a Jew writing to these Hasidic Jews, so most likely he's writing to the Pharisees and the Zealots and those people who are participating in synagogue. But why in the world would he be writing them? Pick it up in verse 3.
It seemed good to me also. Wait, no. Let me read the NIV one. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning.
Okay. What does it mean by he's carefully investigated?
I don't know.
As a physician, most people would say that he has traveled and spoke to, on his travel, these Hasidim. When they stop in a town and first minister at the synagogue, he is having conversations with these Hasidim to get clarification of the integrity of the scripture and its teaching.
Okay.
Was it because he didn't know it himself, but he had to have a reference point? He was just verifying. Yeah. Because every new town they come to that a synagogue resides in, does it have the same scroll as the one they just left? No. So when those guys open up a scroll and read it, and he verifies that it's the same as what this guy said it was, but the scroll is physically here and it wasn't physically there, and then he has the scroll that was physically there that they got to read from, and he gets to ask this Hasidim about that scroll, and that Hasidim confirms it, or he misquotes the scripture intentionally to this Hasidim, and he goes, "You're right, except for it uses this term," and he knows it because he's just read it for himself. So through his own experience of travels with Paul on this way to all of these many synagogues where they have many other scrolls than they did before, he has developed an understanding that it's dependable and this system is dependable. Yes. No, he would have. It would have been any of the Tanakh, the Torah, the Nevi'im, Ketuvim, Yes, yeah, everything that was previous. That's what he keeps saying. That all these records that are previous to us. And then what does he say? He says, "It seemed good to me also, having followed these things closely, inspected them closely for some time.
I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus."
Now, we translate that word orderly account. Mm-hmm. But that is an improper translation.
What is it?
The proper translation of that word that we have as orderly is ordered or sequenced account.
Okay.
MD,
I thought you said it wasn't sequenced.
I didn't say it wasn't sequenced. I said it wasn't orderly.
Oh, okay.
M.D. Goulder, matter of fact, makes the argument in his 300-page book, and he lays it out that this is done on purpose. Luke does some things on purpose. What two readings are they going to have every week in the...
They're going to read the Torah.
Which is a parashah reading.
And then they're going to read, is it a psalm?
From the writings.
From the writings. Anything from the writings.
Yeah, anything from the writings. Which is going to be a haftarah, is what it's called. They'll have a parashah and a haftarah reading. The parashah being the law, and they're going to cover the law, the first 5 books of the Bible, every year. Every year.
Right.
It's a 1-year cycle. They're going to read through the law, and then they're going to start over. And they're going to have specific readings every week. And the intention is this is the reading that's happened, and we're going to discuss it. It's going to be a conversation piece for the whole week. Then there's also going to be a haftarah reading. There's going to be a history reading every week that's paired up with that parashah reading. And these are going to be the two things that are discussed. M.D. Goulder makes the argument, a very convincing argument, and even lays it out in a table, and we're going to read a matchup today, that Luke actually writes the Gospel of Luke in an ordered, sequenced way to be a partnered reading with the law. That Jesus experienced certain things through his 3 years of life and 3 years of ministry, and it is ordered specifically to line up specifically with a parashah reading. That it is to accompany it, and that the parashah reading and the gospel account make both of them come to life more. So that the parashah, the gospel reading, would then teach these friends of God, these people who are participants in the synagogue, that it would show them that they would have certainty concerning the things that they have been taught. So my argument for Luke, go ahead.
Would another reason be that in reading Luke, you can then show prophecy and fulfillment of prophecy?
The gospel that actually spends the most time dealing, yes, you could, but the gospel that actually spends the most time dealing with the fulfillment of prophecy is the gospel of Matthew. I feel like my thing's about to go off. Anyway, zombie apocalypse, it's coming. Just kidding. I'm not a doomsday prepper, so. So my argument for the Gospel of Luke is that Luke was actually in that day very much considered a Jew, and he wrote this book not for the Gentiles. Another argument that I have that this book is not for the Gentiles is there is no reason to put the genealogy of Jesus in here if it's for the Gentiles. They don't care. They don't care whose baby's daddy's mother's daddy. That's not important to a Gentile. But it would be important to a Jew. And if, in fact, this is an ordered and sequenced process, it's supposed to overlay with the parashah, then there would be a Torah, an Old Testament reading that would coincide with the reading of that genealogy that would give the believer, the person who's already a friend of God, a reason to trust that Jesus is the Christ and that what they have already been taught is trustworthy. There's another book that you can look. Luke and Acts are chock full of literary tools, such as what would be literary tools that we talked a lot about in the Old Testament, especially in the early Old Testament.
Oh, chiasms?
Chiasms.
I don't know that word.
Full, chock full. Very intellectual one. You can actually get the 2 volumes together in one book. It's The Poet and the Peasant and Through Peasant Eyes by Kenneth Bailey. Another great resource to help you with the book of Luke. But I think if we begin to understand this, and we're going to unpack it a little bit more in just a minute, we're going to read a parashah reading that lines up with a specific passage from Luke and see if it does actually line up and help us have more depth and certainty to God is still the same. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
This is who Luke is. This is what Luke is doing. And so, I know it's really academic this evening, but I think it's very, very important for us not to just jump to, well, we have a Gentile author writing to Gentiles without examining the evidence of Luke. So my argument is that Luke is a Jewish author who would have been viewed as a Jew, and he's writing this ordered pairing of accounts to a Jewish audience for them to understand that what they've already learned is true and it is fulfilled in Christ. And so I think it's very, very important. And so we're going to experience that right now in person. So if you're not joining us in person, I encourage you to be here. If you were here last week, you would have enjoyed our conversation on the book of Mark, which I'm sure we will record at some point, but you should come and be here. We'll be back Sunday morning, 10:30, and we're going to have a discussion about and a reading through a couple things. So